students that present for us some of their findings from their research. This is intended to be interdisciplinary, and it typically is. In fact, almost uniformly is, where they bring in at least two disciplines with biblical principles infused. So we have three of those presentations tonight. We'll have questions from our panel tonight, which is a smaller panel than usual, but a lot better looking without the guys here tonight. And then we'll take questions from the audience. And so we'll move through things about 40 minutes at a clip, I think, between the presentation and the questions. So we should be in good shape that way. Again, we appreciate you being here tonight. You're always a support to them. When people show up here, it's always good to see faces in front of us. And so tonight we have Hallie Martin, who will be presenting first from Sharpsburg, Georgia. And then Jesse Trimble, who's from right here in Temple Terrace, will be presenting for us tonight, as well as Jordan Griggs, who's from the great state of Arkansas. So I'll have them in order tonight. And first then, Hallie Martin will come forward, and she's presenting tonight for us on the matter of bioremediation, right? How to best harness the use of science to help us rescue ourselves from our misdeeds, I suppose, in the environment. So Hallie, come on up.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to talk about bioremediation, some methods that are used, and kind of tie it into red tide and a potential solution for that. So bioremediation is a process that depends on biological systems to reduce contaminants in water, soil, or air. And while it doesn't always cleanse it completely, the purpose is to take what is harmful in the soil or the contaminated substance and make it less harmful. So the pollutants could be heavy metals, toxins, fertilizers, detergents, antibiotics, paints, disinfectants, different nanoparticles, etc. And there are two specific categories. One is ex situ, which is when the polluted substance is excavated from its environment and treated elsewhere. And then in situ, which is when the substance is repaired within its environment. So the ex situ approaches for bioremediation are biopile, windrow, bioreactor, and land farming. And then the in situ processes are comprised of natural attenuation, bioslurping, bioventing, biosparging, and phytoremediation. Now, when choosing a method, environmental factors are very important to consider, and these include pH, temperature, moisture, nutrients. And essentially the goal is to degrade, mineralize, transform different substances polluted with heavy metals, hydrocarbons, etc. So the different ex situ methods are biopiling for the first one, which involves excavating the contaminated soil and then piling it on top of the surface in order to provide it with additional nutrients and aerate it, which encourages the production of microorganisms. Now, almost all of the methods of bioremediation seek to increase the microbe production because the bacteria and organisms in the soil are what help to enhance the remediation. Now, this process is cost-effective and the environmental factors are easily controlled. The next one I'll talk to you about is the windrow technique, which is very similar to biopiling, but it's where water is added to the pile and then it's rotated periodically. This also increases microbes, which then in turn enhances the degradation. The next one's a little bit different. It's called a bioreactor, and it's a container or vessel that's used to transform the polluted soil or water through biological actions. This method is not very cost-effective nor time-effective because the contaminated substance must be removed and then remedied in batches. The environmental factors, although, are very easy to control in this type of environment because it's taken out, put in its own little container, which is very crucial. And then land farming is the simplest procedure because it doesn't use much equipment and it's very low cost. But depending on how deep the contaminant is in the soil, remediation can take place in the environment or it might need to be excavated. But once again, the idea is to aerate the soil and increase the microbial activity. This process is time-consuming, therefore it's most likely not the most efficient method. The next methods are the in situ methods, which are the ones that take place in the environment. They are more cost-effective and they do less disturbance to the soil structure because they're staying where they are. It can be used to treat dyes, chlorinated solvents, heavy metals, hydrocarbons, the same things as the other one, just in a different area. And the first one is the more holistic method, which is natural attenuation, also called intrinsic bioremediation. It's more holistic because it refers to the natural process in which the soil or the groundwater transforms contaminants on its own. It has to be monitored by humans to make sure that it's moving properly, but there's no external force involved because it is a passive technique. It's low cost, but since it is passive, it may take longer to detoxify. Another method is called bioventing, which is when oxygen is injected into the substance and into the unsaturated areas of the soil to increase the microbial activity. You also need to add moisture and nutrients, very similar to the ex situ methods, but it's done in the environment. Then bioslurping is another in situ method that combines bioventing with vacuum pumping and vapor extraction to prompt the biodegradation. It uses the vacuum to pump non-aqueous phase liquids from beneath the ground up to the surface to make aeration easier. But a major disadvantage to using this method is that it can be difficult to aerate due to the fluctuating water table underneath the soil. Biosparging is also similar to bioventing in that oxygen is injected into the soil. The oxygen in this method is then used to cause the volatile compounds to move to the unsaturated areas, kind of even it out to make it easier to aerate. For the method, the soil must be permeable and the pollutant must be biodegradable to some extent. Now, this last method of in situ techniques is called phytoremediation, and it's when we use plants to interact with the pollutant in the soil to degrade, to use volatilization, extraction, accumulation, filtration. But the toxin or contaminant will be taken up from the soil into the roots up to the shoots of the plants, which means it's translocated. And a deeper root system is crucial for the plant when choosing it because it will reach further into the polluted soil. The plant must be able to adapt and survive while filtering, so the pollutant can't be toxic to the plant chosen. So choosing the plant is very important. And we actually have a bacteria that is helpful to choose the plant. It's called Rhizosphere, and it's been found to promote plant growth through phytoremediation by enhancing its protection against pathogens. It's cost efficient and environmentally friendly, but unfortunately it is time consuming because the toxin must be taken through the roots and up through the shoots all throughout the soil. Now I want to incorporate red tide, and the solution, a potential solution is phytoremediation. But red tide is a growing problem that impacts the marine ecosystem and human life. It's caused by a toxin called Carina brevis, also known as brevetoxin. It's prominent in the Gulf of Mexico, but it is becoming more prominent along the coast of Florida. But economically speaking, red tide is detrimental. In 2017, the effect on fish and shellfish cultivation was $1.5 billion, and in 2018, it increased to $5.6 billion. Now, considering the tourism economy, when red tide blooms are present, fishing operations are halted, seaside restaurants can't have their outside dining due to adverse airborne effects, and the beaches are covered in dead fish. Lodging at the affected beach towns has decreased by over 15% when blooms are occurring, and restaurant sales are down by 1.74% whenever the blooms are present. If beaches are unusable due to the deceased fish and less dining, people will be deterred from areas with algal blooms, which also affects the other businesses in the areas, so it's kind of like a spread from the inside out. There have been studies to observe bioremediation of brevetoxin, and while there was progress, there is further research required. But transitioning to a theological perspective, God created and sustains all creation, and He blessed us with stewarding and caring for it. So we should have a mindset that focuses on God when considering our relationship with the earth. We should respect and honor God as stewards rather than owners. If our mindset is on consumption, then our heart is not right with our Father because our purpose is to glorify Him. And just as we glorify God, the earth also glorifies God. It declares His power, His beauty, His goodness, and majesty. But bioremediation utilizes these living organisms to treat and detoxify polluted environments, and it's a testament to nature's resilience and adaptability. Using the functions and abilities of microorganisms, remediation can be cost-effective and environmentally friendly. Rather than using purely mechanical or technological methods, we can combine them with an aspect of ecological sustainability. The potential of bioremediation is vast, and its importance is multifaceted. In restoring our environment, we are stewarding creation well and praising God through repairing His blessing to us. Thank you for coming tonight.
So this probably became popular in the last 30 years,
Mhm.
I'm guessing? Yeah, I figured it would be that. Jesse, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, the in situ?
In
method?
situ?
In
Mhm.
situ, okay. How does that affect like the ecosystem, like the animal life that's there? Because it's like happening where they are instead of like being transported.
Mhm. I actually read, I'm not sure if I included this method in my paper, but I read about a technique that they used non-permeable liner around where they were repairing, remediating to mitigate the effects of anything coming out. So there are things like that, but any kind of aeration shouldn't really affect the environment unless it's the ex situ method, which is disturbing the soil structure and taking it out. So that would be a problem. But
When you say the layers put on there is sort of like what you put down as ground cover, something like that? Okay. Jordan?
Comment and then question off of that. I thought it was really cool, the in situ methods where like using water to purify whatever's going on, and then using, like bringing in plants and other parts of creation to cure a different part of creation. And that part was super cool, that God made the world to where it can heal itself. That was awesome. But you mentioned the downside to using that being that it's time consuming. I was wondering, what are some instances where time would be important in that?
Honestly, the only thing I can really think of is if there's a pollutant in the soil that's spreading quickly, then that would be a problem. But other than that, I haven't read anything about issues with time.
It's gone on for many, many years, the pollution of the oceans. So to reverse all that takes some time. But it is amazing. You mentioned it, Jordan. Our bodies are created so that they heal, right? And they get help along the way with medical care. It's like medical care for the oceans, I
Yes.
suppose, in a funny way. But that's true. I mean, God created the world we have around us so it'll flush itself out in some ways. I was mentioning that earlier today. How many of you were born, oh boy, I probably shouldn't ask this question. How many of you can remember when you couldn't eat fish out of the Great Lakes? Now you can catch fish and eat them out of the Great Lakes. Mercury poisoning. You remember, you're from that area of the world. And lo and behold, once you stop dumping mercury into a Great Lake, eventually, within a few years, it kind of doesn't just go away altogether, but it makes it so over time that it will clear itself out. The river's the same way. Dr. Chilcote's here from the great state of Ohio. The Cuyahoga River in the early 1970s. What happened? Do you remember?
Well, they dumped so much pollutants in it that it managed to catch fire, so you had fire sitting on the water. It was a great tourist invitation. Yeah.
It's a pretty good indication that when you have spontaneous combustion on a river, probably you put too much junk into it. But again, once you stop doing that, God has created things so that it can flush itself out in pretty good ways. And then there's many examples of that. Dr. Gilliam I was talking to earlier today, Southern California, it's a similar case, where it just reeked until they stopped dumping waste into that area. And then it started to remediate itself. So you're talking about using natural
Attenuation.
yes, to do that, to do the work for us, or to push that process along.
Yes.
So it's really an amazing thing, and in the last 30 years, it's really ramped up in interest. Good. Ruth, you have a question?
I was just wondering, on what scale is this like bioremediation happening? Like small, large?
Oh, I'm not sure actually.
Is it just in like, do they have it in like a concentrated area, or do they just kind of try to get as far as possible?
I would assume that it's as far as possible. I haven't read anything with the ex situ methods. Most likely it would be in an area where the pollutant hasn't traveled very far, so it'd be a smaller area, but if it were me, if there was an area that needed remediation, I think the in situ would be most likely the one that's used. But I'm not sure about how far it's spread.
In the state of Florida, have you read much about a cure to combat red tide then? Because you mentioned that focus.
Right now, I think it's just there is research happening to see if there's something that we can do using bioremediation, but there's nothing that I've read about that's happening now.
Any universities that are focused on it? University of Florida does a lot with agricultural research.
I know there's one. Oh, I can't remember actually.
Yeah. Because that's what you mentioned, cost sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
and time sensitivity. So,
Yes.
so
I was just wondering, like, if in your research you could see, like, overall, like, does it seem to be better to use the ex situ methods or the in situ methods, like, overall?
From my research, I think overall it would be the in situ just because there's less disturbance with everything. Unless, like Jordan was talking about, if there'd be an issue with it spreading to other parts of the environment, then I would say in situ.
I don't know how you pronounce those things, but just say it with confidence and we'll believe you. All right.
I was wondering, like, could an in situ method be used on like a landfill or something like that, where there's like a ton of toxins coming off of it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Unless the landfill was over soil and we did something to, I don't know, maybe bury it in soil and then do something. See, it just depends on if there's something in there that's biodegradable. If it's not biodegradable, then certain, like, other methods have to be used to degrade the heavy metals, but I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Yeah, it might be a different ballgame above water as opposed to what you're talking about here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Based on what you can use or going to what you can use. There's so many examples of environmental disasters. Your generation grew up with recycling. Can anybody remember a time when there wasn't recycling? I can't. You didn't used to care. Throw the glass bottles out or get them refilled, maybe. And there was nothing like a recycling container. Your generation has come along, and if you don't recycle, you get shamed, right? So, and the reason for that is there's only so many places to throw things away. And so you have to think about recycling and stop the pollutants. All right, go back through. You have any other questions, comments? That's it? Toxins on the soil. Sarah? Ruth?
Who would be using these methods? Would farmers be using them to try to clean up their soil? Every couple of years or something?
I think probably mostly with farmers, maybe land farming, just rotating the soil, adding water is a good way to aerate, produce those microorganisms. So I think so, yeah.
I really appreciated your conclusion and just the perspective that you took with all of this, because sometimes, I don't know, like from a Christian perspective, it's like, oh, well, we're going to leave this world anyway, so bummer for everyone else. But God gave us this, and I love how you pointed that out, that this isn't just a place that we're living, this is a gift from God, and we need to treat it like that. And I love your perspective with all of that. I think there's a lot of motivation to get people to care about it the way that you put it, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thought you were describing the national debt for a minute. We're going to leave it to the next generation. Which again goes to money and cost, and you said time and cost for the two key things. Any governmental programs so far? State
I'm not sure.
programs? Yeah, this is all, is it more theory at this point?
Not completely, but it is new.
Yeah. Okay. Jesse?
Yeah, you mentioned red tide, but I was wondering if you read anything about like oil spills and how like the water could be cleaned. Like, I know there would probably be something different because it's not so.
Yeah, I read a little bit about it. Mostly they were ex situ methods, which is, and with the bioreactor, taking the water out and putting it into the bioreactor, mediating it, putting it back to where it belongs. So.
Very good. How about from the audience? Questions, comments? Everybody wants to save the world's oceans tonight. Well, the key is, yes, ma'am.
Well, I was just reminded, when you're talking about the rejuvenation of nature and how God's made it that way. There's a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins entitled God's Grandeur. And he speaks to the how man trods and abuses the environment, the land, and yet he says, and yet for all this, nature is never spent. That speaks to the rejuvenation of nature, God's grandeur.
You know, what's interesting is that the Great Lakes weren't supposed to be able to be used for maybe generations. Nobody foresaw that they would clear themselves out the way they did once we stopped polluting them within a handful of years. There's other cases of environmental disaster. You're probably thinking like Exxon Valdez, Jesse, with oil spills. And you know, how do you clear that up? I mean, some things last longer. Yeah.
I think the city of Pittsburgh, when I was growing up, it was just filthy. The steel mills belching all that, and the mines. I mean, when it snowed, it would come down perfectly clean, and then everybody's chimneys would let all the coal dust out, and your snow became gray. And when the steel mills shut down, and when the EPA, had mandatory cleanup, and you look at pictures of Pittsburgh now, it's the highlight of Monday Night Football. Look at this beautiful city.
Well, I don't know.
And it was
Steelers.
filthy. It was a terrible. Pittsburgh was the example of how we've destroyed, the environment. And now those rivers are pure and clean, and it's amazing.
The balance, Hallie, here is you don't want to pollute the environment. On the other hand, we do like houses to live in. We do like cars to drive. And even if you depend on batteries for cars, you've got to mine for the minerals that you need. So how do you make sure that you don't harm the environment that way? And so, how are we good stewards and still live a life that's fulfilling becomes the question, and that's useful. But you point to some good things here. Anything else from the group? Yes, ma'am.
So we need to be good stewards, and we shouldn't pollute, but we also should realize, and this is something for the younger generation too, that there's nothing that we're going to do that's going to destroy the earth. God's promised us that. And so although, you do the best you can, you definitely don't want to make it worse, but don't be so worried and anxious, and people are so afraid of that, especially young people are.
Anxiety, it's interesting, anxiety continues to increase among those of your generation. And some of that COVID brought on. Some of that the environment, the worship of the environment is brought on. I can't hardly breathe without ruining the environment. And when I eat onions, that might be the case, right? Or we get into crazy thoughts that way. So being good stewards and yet remembering we're put here in order to use God's blessings, and we shouldn't just rein ourselves in so much that we're not doing it. So there is a balance there. So that's a good point. Yeah, when there have been nuclear showdowns, people have reminded themselves that, will God allow us to completely destroy his creation? Yes or no? And every Christian's batted that one around at times. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking to that, I was just looking up out of curiosity while we were talking about it to see what some places like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and I easily found some articles here on how Chernobyl, their wildlife's coming back, reforestation of the area, and apparently the fallout, is immediate, for the, of course, obviously human populations that were affected. But over the last 30 years since it's happened, there has been a uptick in the, Mother Nature, the Lord, the way he created our environment to replenish itself is happening there, even where I think of it as a massive major disaster coming back.
So the more we can add to that recovery with things like this, the better we're doing, I suppose. So, yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
fun with people, so forgive me for a second. And see if, or maybe forgive me for several minutes if I can make this come back on. For that, this, that. I love it when it works. Look at that. Isn't technology wonderful when it works? I mean, it's great. Our second presentation tonight, Jesse Trimble is going to be talking to us about the connections between literature and science. Jesse, full disclosure, Jesse and I have crossed swords over this matter. Is there a real left-right brain difference or not? Geometry is still the only math class that makes sense to me. A language person. I talk to math and science people. Geometry makes no sense to them. Of course, they're completely wrong, right? Looking at the science people. And so Jesse's looked at the tie between literature and science and the whole left-right brain mythology, in a sense. So, Jesse, come on up.
Please let me not break this. Okay. Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, I am going to speak on the connections between the study of science and the study of literature, which might seem very, very different, but I hope that by the end of this, you all will understand where I'm coming from and the perspective on it. This would go, please. There it is. Okay. So. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. It is, strictly speaking, a real factor in scientific research. Albert Einstein said this in his work, Cosmic Religion and Other Opinions and Aphorisms in 1931, when explaining how he came up with his theory of relativity. Now, he's referencing the idea of being able to imagine things past directly what is in front of us, in front of our eyes. To ask the question, what if? He's heralded as one of the most influential scientists of the 20th century, and yet he's stating the importance of imagination over knowledge. Does that seem weird to anyone else? So today, I conducted a random poll of 41 students, and I asked them to tell me the first thing that came to mind when I said the words literature and science. And these are the answers I got. I heard the word books 15 times, writing 6 times, Shakespeare 6 times, British, imagination, author, and teacher. And one guy asked me what literature was. I think maybe we should check on him and see if he's all right. But when I asked the word science, I heard chemicals and test tubes 7 times, biology 6 times, Albert Einstein 2 times, exploring, chromosome, Thomas Edison, math, atoms, and one guy said the color green. No, it was not the same guy as, as what is literature. But contrary to this poll, science is not only an amalgamation of logical-minded research in a lab with a lot of chemicals and test tubes. It requires someone with creativity and imagination to ask questions and come up with solutions. Just as Albert Einstein said, to look beyond what we see and ask the question, what if? Now, literature is not just about reading. Yes, it does make up about 90% of what we do in class every day. But it's not just about reading a lot of books or writing a lot of creative work. Literature, the study of literature, requires the ability to methodically comprehend and organize, to break down and analyze critically, to read beyond the text and mine the gaps to see a bigger picture. Logic and analytical thinking are most associated with the study of science and mathematics, whereas imagination and creativity are more associated with the study of literature and the arts. And this leads to the incorrect assumption that scientists and mathematicians cannot be creative or imaginative, and artists and authors cannot be analytical or logical. And the skills used by students in each of these subjects prove that there is a connection between the methods used in the study of science and the study of literature. And by identifying these connections between these studies, we can dissolve the notion that creativity belongs in the arts and analytical thinking belongs in the sciences. But first, we are going to look at the right brain, left brain theory. Now, honestly, I'm pretty sure everyone in here has heard of this at some point in their lives or seen some kind of diagram that looks exactly like this one. But it gave traction to this notion of dividing people into two groups, people who are governed by the right hemisphere of the brain and those who are governed by the left. And it originated in the 1960s from the works of Dr. Roger Sperry, who was a researcher at Caltech trying to understand epilepsy by studying hemispheric lateralization, which is just how both hemispheres of the brain process information. And he severed the connections between the left and right hemispheres of the brain on 11 test subjects, and they were asked to perform a series of cognitive and behavioral tests. What he discovered was that when severed, both hemispheres act as independent entities and respond adversely when presented with different stimuli. The conclusion of these experiments was that different hemispheres of the brain have different tasks, and therefore they're inclined to different types of thought. And these experiments assigned the left side of the brain analytical, logical, mathematical, and orderly thinking. Therefore, someone who is governed by the left side of the brain will be more methodical and calculated, and the right side of the brain was assigned creative, imaginative, emotional, and intuitive thinking. This means that someone who is driven by the right side of the brain is more inclined to visual studies and is more unorganized or chaotic. Now, before we go further, I just want to say this. I'm not trying to minimize the research that Sperry did. I do believe his research was important. But when I was looking at the left and right brain theory, there was a study conducted in 2013 that was done with 1,000 people instead of 11. And they found that the two hemispheres of the brain cannot act independently of one another, but they rather work cohesively together. So someone cannot have a dominant right side of the brain. It has to be together. And I'm not denying that some people are more drawn to the study of science and others are more drawn to the study of literature. Rather, the problem with the theory is that it pigeonholes people into one side of the other. You can either be creative or you can either be logical. And you can either be dominantly controlled by the right side of your brain over the left. And with this in mind, let's move forward. So, the first connection we're going to look at between the study of literature and the study of science is that both ask questions and search for answers about society and the world. This requires students to have strong, comprehensive, and critical thinking skills. Science studies life and asks questions to better understand the natural world. Literature is a record of culture and continues to question society and the world it inhabits. Critical thinking skills are needed to analyze texts or data and ask questions, and both require the use of creativity to think past what is plainly seen to find a creative solution to a question posed. The study of science and the study of literature can be both reduced to a single question. What if? What if I drop this rock and feather off a building at the same time? Which will hit the ground first? What if aliens existed? What if they came here? What if my mother-in-law tried to kill me? You can apply what if to anything. And both scientists and writers ask this question, then make observations driven by creative thinking. Scientists use creativity and imagination to solve a problem, and writers use this question to drive a narrative in their work. Now, the two examples we're going to look at is the scientific method and plot diagrams, which may sound like they have nothing in common, but they do, I promise. Okay, so this is the scientific method, and I'm pretty sure that everyone should be familiar with this. But it's a series of steps used by scientists to test a hypothesis and prove that it's true, that it could become a natural law. So you ask a question, predict an outcome, collect evidence through experimentation, you organize the data, and then you prove whether the research you have supports the hypothesis. And if it doesn't, you start from the beginning and you ask another question. Therefore, all scientific research must adhere to this series of steps with a single, solitary outcome. Now, in the study of literature, this is a plot diagram. In the study of literature, the plot diagram is used similarly. A plot diagram breaks down a literary work into different events to acknowledge the different steps taken to achieve a single, solitary outcome. Now, it's divided into different sections. You have the exposition and the conflict, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. All fictional literary work can be broken down into this series of events, and all literature students follow this trail to find the outcome. Therefore, both students who study literature must use critical thinking skills to break down or build plots to find the single outcome, and students who study science must use critical thinking skills to break down or build scientific laws. Single outcome, both ways. However, it's also interesting to consider the process of writing a novel and the process of writing a paper to prove a theory have similarities. Stuart, I am going to not say this right, Rochester is a geophysicist and a former Duke University professor, and he's written several magazine articles and academic papers, and he's written a novel. And he wrote an article, A Scientist Makes Art, and he reasons that the process by which he writes in a novel is identical to the process for which he writes academic geophysics papers. He uses an example of how he would write a paper on geysers. He first asks a question about geysers, does research on geysers with first-hand experience collecting data, and then sifts through the data to find a solution. For his novels, he also asks himself a question, does research on the subject, and then sifts through this research to create characters that solve the solution to the question posed at the beginning. The study of literature and the study of science are also similar because both require logistical and methodical application of knowledge. Science is driven by research and discovery, with people who perform hands-on training from what they have learned. And literature requires the ability to logically discern and understand what is being said in a passage. Both the study of literature and the study of science require students to spot intricate details and understand how they become part of a whole. And the example we're going to use for this is dissection and sentence diagramming. So, okay. All right. The process of dissection is meant to help students understand the intricacies and the collaboration between different parts of different systems in the body. And the body is made up of units of organization, which is what you see on this slide. You have a cell that comes together to form a tissue, tissues come together to form organs, organs come together to form organ systems, and organ systems come together to form organisms. So when a scientist is dissecting something, they have to look at each one of these things individually and see how it would affect the whole. What if a group of cells incorrectly functions? What if it begins to overproduce cells? What if the stomach acid comes up out of the stomach into the esophagus? What happens then? Why is it dysfunctioning? You break it all down into simple pieces. Now, in sentence diagramming, no, I did not diagram this sentence. That part of my life is over, and I am happy. In sentence diagramming, a literature student must dissect a sentence to understand its components, such as the types of words used, so nouns, adjectives, verbs, and punctuation. And by understanding each component, a student can see how different types of words complement each other, and they come together to form a whole sentence. This means that the study of literature requires a student to use logic and organizational skills, a left brain trait. They need to know how the sentence structure changes if words are switched, how the message of the sentence changes with different punctuation. However, another way the study of science and the study of literature are connected is seen through different literary periods. And no, I'm not talking about science fiction work, which I do love. But most namely, we're going to talk about the Romantic period of literature. Now, the Romantic period of literature is from 1800 to 1850, and it's known for having themes such as emotion, elevation of the common man, elevation of common events, and glorification of nature. However, the most important theme that connects the study of science with literature is the theme of mankind's continued striving forward. This highlights man's continual search for knowledge, ignoring the consequences, and his willingness to sacrifice whatever to achieve this great knowledge. And this theme is seen in works such as The Birthmark by Nathaniel Hawthorne, Goethe's Faust, a little bit you see in Frankenstein. But the study of science allows people to learn more about the world around them, to understand the intricacies of life. Much like literature, science is a record of mankind's continual striving to understand his existence. This acknowledges a very concerning message that emphasizes the need for us to understand that there is only so much knowledge mankind can know. Mankind can keep striving, but must acknowledge that there are only some things God knows, and it is man's knowledge that will not save us in the end. The knowledge that will save us is found in the Bible, not found in a written work or a scientific experiment. But the study of literature and the study of science both require the same methodical thinking, creative problem solving, imaginative solutions, and logical contemplation. And the right brain, left brain theory minimalizes people into two separate categories that in turn causes a separation between the ideas of what a literature student looks like and what a science student looks like. And people can be more inclined to scientific studies or more inclined to literature studies. But the continued idea that the study of science only uses analytical or logical thought, while the study of literature uses only creative and imaginative thought, minimalizes the people who devote their lives to either. Science holds a magnifying glass to the natural world, while literature holds a mirror to society. And yet both reflect culture and knowledge acquired over the history of mankind. The study of both stimulates and invigorates the mind. And both require comprehension and critical thinking skills to mine the gaps and ask questions to uncover a greater message. Thank you.
Jesse is uniquely qualified amongst our group to speak on this. She would say, well, she is here senior, right?
Yes, sir.
And the English program that Mrs. Witherington has up, and she's aiming towards medical school. We have had music majors here who have gone on to PA school, which is another example of how is the creative world so separate from the technical world. There's very separation there at all. And Einstein, in his greatest discoveries, participated in thought experiments where he sat there and thought, let his brain work creatively. I'd like to be alone with Einstein in the room as he thought, just to look at him. But at any rate, it's interesting. Jen, you have a question?
Kind of just a comment, because I definitely agree with what you're saying. I'm in nursing, so I like applied it to that. And like we're taught to like assess a patient, and like that's supposed to be science, very like analytical. But then it's like, what if the medicine doesn't work, or what if the person can't take it this way? And then you have to think outside the box, more of like a right-brained way, like the creativity. So I just definitely like agree with what you're saying, that they're definitely intertwined.
Do people who are technical take great comfort in numbers and scientific things that lead us to a singular solution? Yes. And so it's very comfortable to think that way, and vice versa. Yeah. Sarah?
I don't really know if I have a question either, but it just made me think about like being intentional about the information you're consuming, like when you're, especially when we're students, but even outside of that, when you go into the workplace, like if you're in science all the time, to be intentional about looking at literature and those kinds of things, because they are so connected, and vice versa for the same, because they are so connected, and I think both of them can just intertwine with each other so much. And like you were saying at the end, like the whole left brain, right brain theory kind of like puts people in a box, but not to like conform to that as much, and you know, not put yourself in a box too, but to step outside of that. So.
I just thought it was interesting, and you already mentioned it, but I was thinking that even like writers will use their creativity to write stories that make readers use their critical brain, like in thrillers and mysteries, and so I thought it was just interesting to tie that all together.
Any other works you saw that, and you mentioned Frankenstein?
Frankenstein, Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Birthmark. Goethe's Faust is like the biggest one, about a man who's willing to sacrifice even his soul for like the end knowledge of everything.
I love your topic. In Latin growing up, one of the years in high school, we did something called the Quadrivium Quest, based off of ancient Rome, how they would teach them based off of the quadrivium, which is the different kinds. Like you had music, you had mathematics, and all of these different things. They taught connections between them. They didn't separate it all out. You learned all of them. And so we had to tie two of them together because I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and we were all super excited about it. And I love how you came at it, I guess, you came at it from both a scientific and a literal perspective, which was super cool as well. And I love the point that everyone is capable of the whole brain. Yes, you're better at some things, and yes, your personality may lend you to be more interested in something, but you are capable of these, and I wish more people could hear that. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I will forgive you all now. No one's mentioned this is the exact image of a liberal arts education. It's an interdisciplinary study, which is what this is about. And so you see the different connections. We encourage that, and that's the way you do understand things better. I can't hope to understand what I study without considering other disciplines. And the Greeks had at least that right, where it should be the whole person that's educated. And they need to bring physics.
I was wondering if there was anything you found that, like any research, that if there's anything in someone's brain that will pull them more towards an analytical thinking side versus creative side, or is it just their personality or the way they're brought up?
I did not see anything on that. The study I mentioned in 2013 where they did it with 1,000 people, they did not cut their brains in half. They did not do that in the 1,000 study. Not in 2013. I mean, in the 60s maybe. But in that one, they concluded that, yes, both sides of the brain do different things, but they work together. So like the left side would look at a mathematical problem, but the right side helps you with the comparisons and the estimates. So it wasn't that you're more inclined on one side of your brain. It was that they work cohesively together. And I didn't see anything about how that would shape with different people, but I'm sure it's about education and just what you connect with when you're a kid.
Is there self-fulfilling prophecy? Maybe do we convince ourselves sometimes I'm just not very good at that, so I'm not going to do it. I'm a left-brain person. I mean, that could be too. I mean, I'm almost a little disappointed. I was going to ask about the 1,000 people that had their brains bisected.
No, they didn't. The 11 did, but the 1,000, they used electrodes and they sectioned off the brain into 7,000 different areas, and they saw where the impulses appeared when they were asked questions.
See, in the 1960s, we cut brains apart, polluted rivers. It was the dark ages. During that time. And something else, Howard?
Now that we brought it up, I was really curious about how they researched by dividing the brain.
Oh, okay.
Were there side effects that these people experienced later in life? Because that feels like it's important, but the study was done to see I was curious the outcome.
I did not see the outcome of those people, and I worry about that every day. But the tests he did, they are very weird. I wrote them down because sometimes they sound kind of weird. Okay, so he used eye patches. So he cut the brain in half, just horrible. And then he'd use an eye patch. So a picture was shown to the right eye, and for some reason, when the picture was shown to the right eye, people couldn't describe it. They didn't know why. But then it was shown to the left eye. No. It was shown to the right eye, and they could describe it. It was shown to the left eye, they could not describe it. And they said because the right eye was able to describe better, in language, and it was able to comprehend and process what it was seeing, then it's the left side of the brain that's more logical. Yeah, because, it's right eye, left, right. Yeah, okay. There was also one where they showed a word on a screen. Same thing with the eyes. And they showed an object. They had a bag full of objects, and you had to reach into the bag and pick out what it was without looking. And they saw that the right hemisphere of your brain, when you looked at it with the left eye, it was more positive. So then the right hemisphere helps you understand objects, which is visual thinking, which is how you get creativity and imagination from. And then they were shown a word on the screen, and they were asked to draw it. And when the right eye saw the word, you could draw it. For some reason, people were able to draw better with their left hand, even if they were right-handed originally. Yeah, and then the last one was you match a face from like a picture. You have to match a face with other faces, and for some reason, the left eye wasn't able to tell the picture or something, so the right eye seemed more dominant and able with facial recognition. Yeah, I saw a lot of negatives about his research. One was like that. And also it was that he only used 11 people. You know, in 2013 they used 1,000 people, so it was very limited. So, yeah.
I say that people take comfort in numbers and signs. People also take comfort in, well, I'm just a creative person.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really quite the case. Questions, comments? Good? Yes, ma'am.
This was reminding me, I haven't thought about this for quite a while, but back 35, 40 years ago, this young black surgeon named Ben Carson came on our radar because we had a friend, young girl, who had a very rare childhood degenerative disease, and I've forgotten the name of the disease. But her brain had been misfiring signals to her, and I think she was about 13. And she had paralysis on one side, and she was basically becoming more and more incapacitated. And while in a waiting room in Chicago, some lady in the waiting room said, "Hey, I saw an article about this groundbreaking work this young surgeon is doing." Make a long story short, our friends got their daughter an appointment with this doctor in Denver, I think he was, Ben Carson, who was doing some very groundbreaking hemispherectomies, where with this particular kind of case, he had studied stroke patients, and when people have a stroke, he had found out that the brain could transfer kind of rapid, if it was a stroke event, could transfer those files to the other side of the brain. So if you had a diseased part of the brain, his theory was if given enough time, which these were gradually over time, withering, I guess, that side of the brain, his theory had been that the information was going over to the healthy side of the brain. So he was doing hemispherectomies. He removed the sick side of the brain, and this young woman, whatever debility she had already had happened, where the paralysis was going to remain. But they basically saved her life. I mean, he took the sick side of the brain, and she's, to the best of my knowledge, still living. She would be, 30s, 40s, be 30-something years old, I would guess. Can't do that. Anyway, it reminds me, just kind of speaking what you're talking about the fluidity maybe of our brains are they're designed maybe to be more capable of, we think we figure out the stratification there, and I tend to kind of think left brain, right brain with people. We do it all the time, that he's an engineer. We can't expect much more from him socially than these stereotypes, but there's a lot of truth in what you're saying as far as integration. God seems to design our brains. I appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you.
We're very proud of you.
I actually did see a study that the only instance in which the left side of the brain would function more than the right side, or the right side would function more than the left, is if one of the sides was damaged. It picks up the slack. So that would be the only instance, but it didn't affect people's personalities at all.
You wouldn't start wearing pocket protectors.
No. their vision didn't go. It was fine.
Mrs. Drake?
I was thinking about this example of a theory that catches on and people just buy into. I was thinking about how I went to a conference and there was a neuroscientist who talked about how that theory about education where you have visual learners and auditory learners and tactile learners, and that there was no basis in any kind of social science research of any kind to come up with that, but it just caught on because, and I was just thinking in the same way, when people tell us that, you know, well, you're just right brain or you're just left brain, well, then it's sort of like, well, okay, then I'm fine. You know, I have an explanation, so it catches on. But like, how do we undo that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Because here's someone who's done a study that says, okay, let's put this to bed now, and yet people will continue to hang on to that. I'm more right-sided than left.
Yeah.
And there's another thing too. I was thinking of Jules Verne.
Yeah.
And how, you know, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and, you know, the space stuff and all that, that it was in his imagination. And then later, science, you know, when it came out, it was science fiction. These things are weird, who would ever? And then we actually do plumb the depths of the ocean and, you know, send people to the moon. And but those things have to come from somebody's imagination before you're ever going to try the science.
It's the what if question, you know. Even Ray Bradbury or Orwell, 1984, I mean, you read that and, you know, you read Fahrenheit 451, it hits very differently when you're older. When I was a kid, they made us read that, but I love it. I love Fahrenheit 451 just because everything that they say in there is so applicable to what's happening today. And that had to come from somewhere.
It's a combination of reflection on society and then what can't be if things go too far. Yeah, and at the same time, we all have a natural bent to something. It seems like sports, the same way. Some people are more adept at some things than others. Doesn't make you a lesser person, but that's what your natural bent is towards. We're told to try to steer our children towards what their natural bent is in life and encourage them in that. And so there is something to that. But is there an absolute cutoff? I would still say, like we talked about, Einstein's incredibly and the best writers of history are very analytical, but they better be creative too, or else nobody reads their stuff. And in most cases, nobody reads their stuff because they're so dry. But that's just a disservice. And so there's got to be a combination. Right?
And I think the ancient Greeks would laugh at us, telling people to just narrow yourself into the one thing that you seem bent for. They would say, what kind of a human being are you going to be? They would say you have to be a generalist and you have to be perfect at everything. I mean, that was what they aimed for.
And yet there is only one Sophocles, one Euripides, and one Aeschylus. And not everybody could be a dramatist. Not everybody could be a political figure back then, although they were all political animals, they would say. And so we all have a natural bent, but you ought to try to sharpen what you have. And that's true. What else? Questions, comments from the group? Yes, ma'am.
I am studying to be a teacher, so I found this very interesting and very true because I have a lot of students who say, oh, I can't do math because I'm better at reading or whatever. But like we're reading their science textbook and I'm asking them to circle important words or find important details or summarize this in a way that I know that you understand the context. And we're teaching them as scientists to be curious and to ask questions because they can't do both unless they do them like using the same skills. So I just really loved everything you said and I completely agree. And I think that, yeah, it's difficult when you have a student who's, it's just really hard for me when they say, oh, I'm not good at that or I can't do math because I'm better at reading. I just think as teachers we're working towards integrating that and it's just hard. Like when it's coming from their home, that's like, oh, like, cause you know, everybody believes this thing that just is not really true. So yeah, totally agree with what he said.
So, you two, we expect you to change society. This
whole thing is gonna be
we don't expect it all at once. And within a generation, wish they would have history across the curriculum, and they don't, to their detriment. But you're right, Taylor. I mean, it's all about the encouragement of the kids. That, yeah, sure, you might struggle a little bit with this, but you can do this. And that's part of the role of the teacher.
I mean, if you practice it every single day your entire life, and one day it's gonna click. Yeah. I see it a lot with people that want to do art. They get upset the first time they draw because it's not good, but then they look at people on Instagram that have been drawing their entire lives, and it's like they've been doing that every day. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you show them cubism, and anybody can do that.
I did find a source that was saying like the mathematical applications of cubism. It was very weird, but I didn't understand it. Oh.
I was gonna say, there's a very short little TED Talk, but it's a nice one, that there's a man that's talking about why people think they can't draw. And he says, if you say to a 5-year-old, draw us a house, every 5-year-old draws a house. I mean, there will be different degrees of whether you can notice it as a house, but no 5-year-old will say, I can't draw. They just do it. And then it's either encouragement they get from other people or discouragement they get from other people, so they stop doing those things. And then his talk is where he says, by the time you're finished, you're gonna be drawing cartoons. And he really does show people, and everybody there draws cartoons. And there's these adults sitting there going, look what I did. Just like little kids. And I think some of that is what we do in education, encouraging rather than discouraging.
Yeah, it's not confined just to professional educators. God blesses you with families, children. It's on you. You can encourage them, you can pigeonhole, right? And so, I know most of you pretty well, and so I know you've got interests in other areas than what you're focused on. And that's because you're encouraged. And so that's what we do with that. Well, thank you very much. All right, now, Jordan, let's see. We can do this. As the French say. Okay, good. We just go with the arrows. Jordan Griggs is a sophomore now, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Jordan Griggs is a sophomore, I mentioned, from Arkansas in biblical education, and so she's going to present on children's Bible classes. She had good experiences this summer, right?
Yes, sir.
Came with my grandson.
Indeed.
Tell us more.
Right. So my goal with biblical education long term is to hopefully create some kind of Bible class curriculum from infant to adult to give us the best chance of learning how to study the Bible and building that love and passion for God and His Word. So right now I'm focusing more on the youth and the youngest levels. And as all of the teachers in this room know, teaching is more than just knowing different tactics as to how to get this across to a kid. You can learn all the different methods, all the different tactics in the book, and you get to a classroom and that didn't work, and this didn't work, and this didn't work, because you're teaching people, especially when they're very small people. Most of it's not going to work. So I had the incredible opportunity this summer to step in and teach the 1 to 3-year-old class at Downtown Church of Christ in Rogers, where my family attends. So when I got there at the beginning of the summer in May, I sat in the class for a month with the current teacher and just kind of observed how she did things, what lessons were being taught, and giving the kids a chance to recognize my face and feel comfortable with me, which is also important. And at that time, there were 5 kids in the class. There were 2 boys, 2 girls, and then 1 baby who was under a year old. And after a little over a month of observation, the current teacher and I sat down and kind of talked over things that we could change, things that she felt were going well, things that I felt like, hey, could we try this? And after a little bit, she, as well as the elders, gave me permission to try something new in the class, which was super exciting. So during that month, I just tried to take note of different things that I liked, things I didn't like, things I wanted to try. So some things they had really, really good were they had manipulatives for all of the little kid songs that they did. When I was little, we would sing a song called Tiny Little Daisy, and we each got a fake flower from Hobby Lobby, and it grew up and got thrown to the ceiling at the end of the song. And I remember that at 20 years old. It was great. So they had those in little buckets for probably 15 different songs, and that was fantastic. Their stories that they covered were consistent and repetitive, used the same words, which is very important for a small kid. And when they got there, there were some introduction songs to remind them, hey, it's Bible class time, you need to settle down, be calm, it's time to be quiet. Something that also kind of surprised me and impressed me was that they were already incorporating memorization of Bible facts, which is not normal at a toddler level in a Bible class. So I was so excited that that was already happening. The kids had caught on, they were excited about it, it was amazing. But there were some things that I'm like, I kind of want to change this. Number one, there was a baby in the toddler class, which there were excellent reasons for it. It was encouraging her sister to come and sit. It was great, but the baby was distracting. She constantly needed something to hold, touch. She's a baby, she's going to throw it on the ground. Her sister would watch her, and it was distracting the class. And the baby could be having songs and things for her level because she can't understand things. But at that point, it was just distracting. I also felt there were too many introductory songs that had nothing to do with the Bible. And while important to get them in and calm down, the point is to teach them. And there was too much wheels on the bus happening at the beginning of class. Another thing is that while repetition is good, once a kid catches on, it's okay to move on. They had the same exact story for almost a month. There went the whole time of the month that I observed, they got through 2 stories, and I don't know how many weeks beforehand it had been happening. Plus side, these kids knew that story and could tell it to you, and it was amazing and super encouraging. There were constant interruptions. They weren't held to a high behavioral standard. They would fight over manipulatives for the story and the lessons, which was distracting and had the teacher have to pause. And there were just a few low mental expectations. Yes, they knew facts, they knew different things, but they weren't being pushed because these are smart kids. So as with any project that a person can undertake, you have goals that you want to happen, and there's an original plan, and then there's what actually happens. So my original plan was there's this book, CD, children's thing called Each Little Dewdrop. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. I loved it. I grew up on it. They were great. But I got the booklet of that, and my goal was to go through one event a week and teach them the song with it. Hi, goal. This age group isn't going to catch on to a new song every single week. They're going to get distracted. It's not going to work, so I had to adjust that, just scrap the song. I wanted to have take-home manipulatives for them each lesson. So when we did Days of Creation, I got little popsicle sticks and pieces of paper, and I drew out a picture for all of the days. They got so excited, and those went great. I had a little girl, I get to take these home? Yeah, oh, right, I can show my mom. Exactly. So she went, showed her mom came back, like she showed me. There was excellent reinforcement at home. Another thing I wanted to try was to have little figurines or characters to act out for the kids each lesson that we were teaching, to give them a visual and something to touch and see, more than just hearing me tell them words. And that went good, but I can't go out and buy a bunch of new things. So we did the story of Pharaoh and Moses and the Israelites, and there was a Goliath character that was an angry soldier, and so he was Pharaoh, and there were all the little children of the world in that little wooden circle, took them out, those are the Israelites, and Pharaoh rode in half of the world as a chariot. They loved it. They remembered it. It was fantastic. It was great. I also wanted them to start going through the books of the Old and New Testament. So I made ladders and put the names on them. We went up the ladder. That's what I did when I was little. Figured that it would work. And they did really good with that. They were super excited. I wasn't sure what to expect because it was a new song. It was a new thing. It's a bunch of words that they can barely pronounce, which was adorable. They were working hard with that, but they loved it, and it was super encouraging. Another thing, I wanted to try to do one lesson a week. And they could, but something I didn't take into account was that not every kid is going to be there at every class. So a little ways in, I adjusted. Let's just try to make them each hear it twice. If every kid hears it twice, we'll push as long as we need to. If they're catching on, awesome, we'll move to the next. If they're not, we can take more time, and just having flexibility with that. So until actually sitting in the teacher's chair and actually doing it myself, I did not realize or think about the importance of having a structured class schedule, especially for kids that young. They need repetition. It's something I learned way too late. They need brain breaks in order to stay engaged and excited. So after a few classes, sometimes way too many classes before I caught on to something, I developed kind of an order for them to get them in a routine. So when they got there, I would offer them either a puzzle or a little toy car that they could do, play with. They were super excited. It made them happy when they got there. Let their parent go sit down. It was super fun. Then I got it to one welcome song, like, hey, we're going to sit down. This is great. And it worked really well. They did just fine with one song. Then we would transition to a couple Bible songs like the B-I-B-L-E or This Is the Way We Pat the Bible, and to kind of get them in that mindset, because then they had questions of how many parts are there to the Bible? What are the parts called? We would go into those next. And then once we'd gotten through all of that, I would tell them the lesson, and we would go through the lesson. And then I'd have questions specifically about that story, and I'd ask them those, and then I would have them help me retell the story to get it through again, and hopefully twice they'll remember a little bit more, and they loved that part. Then to give them a brain break, we would do a coloring page, and they would, sometimes there wasn't a whole lot of coloring, but they got excited about it, so it was fun. And then I would let each kid that was there pick one of their fun songs that they had that were still Bible-based, Bible morals. It was awesome. But they each got to pick one of those so they could move around and loved it. And then if there was time at the end, which there usually was because I underestimated my time, I would have them tell me the story again, so that then when their parents get there, they can go tell their parents. And it was super, super exciting. So that, after we got into kind of a rhythm, that worked really, really well. So then you have the lesson set. Okay, now what are we going to teach them? Because the point of Bible class, regardless of what age group, is to teach them something about God. Even when they're a year old, they can understand it, they can learn just a little bit. So what I tried to learn how to do, you have to keep the stories basic and fundamental. That was hard in trying to sift through all the details, because I want to tell them everything. But they don't care that the plagues are based off of some Egyptian gods. They don't care. They don't care. They care that there's boils popping up on somebody's skin. So learning to do things like that was a lot. I'll actually let y'all see that, sorry. So there's a lot more prep work than I was expecting for a little kids class, because not only do you have to know the story, you have to know how to tell it to a 2-year-old, which is going to be way different. So read the story myself, pick a few of the songs that they already know that can go with it to give them a little break, find a coloring page to go with it, and then actually think through how to tell them the story. And then one thing that I learned over VBS week was pick one takeaway that I want them to come out with. Whole story, but they're 2. Let's give them one thing to remember, and they did fantastic with that. What were super, super helpful was a lot of what do you think about this questions, such as with the Pharaoh to Moses story. Do you think God was very happy to Pharaoh when he said no? And no. And they would go back and forth. We did one, because I would have the little Moses walk over to the little Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, you got to let God's people go. And then I'd say, Pharaoh said, they all screamed no. And then one little boy ran up to his mom when she came to pick him up. Mom, I learned Pharaoh said no. I'm like, what have I done? Okay. But they did great, and they remembered little things. And sometimes what you thought they were going to pick up on goes right over their head. And they find something else that you didn't see, and they latch onto it, and it's the coolest thing ever. Another thing that was important is you have to stay energetic and very expressive, or you will lose them. So learning that it was okay if I am just dead sick, have someone else come teach. That's going to be better for them, even if we're not going to cover the material I wanted to. And you can't stop. You can't pause. It's got to keep going, or you'll lose their focus. Another thing I wasn't expecting for kids this young. I totally underestimated them. They had questions about the story that they came up with. And they were basic, like we were doing the 10 plagues, and one little kid, what's a boil? Like, oh, this is going to be fun. So I had them all stick out their hands. And we went through and I explained what a boil was, and all their faces are like this. But things like that, none of their questions are going to be too simple to answer. It's awesome that they're asking them. And that was super, super cool thing I was not expecting. So I got to teach for about 2 months. So again, throughout this massive, massive learning curve, never done this before. I had a lot of things go as I expected them to. By eliminating the children actually holding the characters in the story, we took out so much distraction and fighting, and they were able to focus without having to touch things, which was great. Another thing, they were able to remember stories more frequently. Like, we probably changed once every 2 to 3 weeks, and every once in a while, if there were just 2 kids on a Wednesday night, we'd have a review. Like, do you remember what happened to Noah? And with prompting, they could tell me the story, and it was so, so, so cool. They succeeded in a higher mental expectation. They rose as high as I wanted them to, and it was fantastic. They were able to pay attention without too much fluff, and I think we underestimate little kids in that a lot. They don't need false facts. You don't have to fluff up a Bible story to get them to understand it. You don't have to add stuff. Tell them the facts. It can be as basic as you want it to, but keep the facts. They can understand it. And then removing the baby, that took a little bit because she was the only one there. But by removing her and giving her her own class, everybody focused better. She got to benefit more from something catered to her. It was fantastic across the board. And they loved getting to take things home and show their parents, and it was super, super fun. Things that did not go like I thought they would. I was not expecting an introductory song to be helpful. I'm like, well, why are we doing that? This is ridiculous. Get that up. Nope, that was helpful. Talked to a lot of people, like, you want them to have a cue to calm down. Had to learn that one myself. And then extending the stories over more than just a week. One thing, I made the books of the Bible in a ladder. I had 2 boys in the class, and on a Wednesday night, I had just one of them there. And I said, hey, do you want to do the ladders? And I got it out, and he looks at it and goes, train tracks. I'm like, okay. So we laid it flat on the table. I gave him a car, and we drove that car over the train tracks probably 3 or 4 times, and he wanted to say the names of the books, and he wanted to do all of that because these are train tracks. Did it with the next kid the next time. I got out the ladder, and he said, train tracks. All right, we're going with the train tracks. Went with those. So adapting to things that clicked for them made it so much more exciting and super fun. The lessons went way faster than I was anticipating. Would probably add more if I could do it over again. They caught on so quickly. Another thing, I haven't had kids, so I did not know to expect this. Their moods are so different on a Sunday morning versus past bedtime on a Wednesday. And being okay with that and knowing that you can expect more of them attention-wise on Sunday, and it's okay to lower that a little bit when it is an hour past these poor kids' bedtime. That was a learning curve for me, but they did fantastic. I was so lucky. And it's hard to find a good story in the Bible that you don't add fluff to that they can pick up on. That was difficult not having done that before. But these kids were so smart. And I'm like, I knew I could push them a little bit further than they had been, but they took off, and it was so, so fantastic. They were incredible. So in the future, there are some things I would want to continue growing in with experience and knowledge about ways to teach these kids the Bible. Because the goal, especially at this age, is to foster an excitement for the Bible and an excitement for God. I don't remember a whole lot of this, like, exact details I learned when I was in a toddler class at church, but I remember the teacher, and I remember being excited to go, and that's what you're going for at that age. You want a joy for God and a joy for studying the Bible. So to do that better next time, I would want to implement a few other things. When possible, this is just on the teacher side, start planning months in advance. I was not able to get manipulatives every single week because I just didn't have time to think through and to do it in a way that would be helpful to them. So starting planning way more in advance would be so helpful. And then with time, adding more activities in and adding more move around activities I think would be so beneficial to them and just give them another opportunity halfway through the class to get their energy out. I also think they would have been so capable of a very, very short memory verse. I think they could have handled that above and beyond, and if I could do it again, I would implement that. And then with more times, obviously more things are possible, adding in new songs, adding in the new sets of information to memorize. I have complete confidence that they can absolutely handle that. So then some final things is just kind of an in general, this was super cool. Every single kid is going to be different. The group of kids I got to work with are going to be so different from a group of kids at Temple Terrace or a group of kids at, I blanked on every other name, at any church around here. There's going to be different personalities, different backgrounds, different family homes, and that's going to dictate how you teach the class and what they're capable of and things like that. Huge thing. Parental reinforcement is vital. So you might not want to be a teacher, but if you have a kid, you cannot expect Bible class to teach them all they need to know about the Bible. I had them for 40 minutes a week and had their attention most of that, but the ones who get the reinforcement at home, whose mom would sit down with them and go over the story again, who would teach them other things, they're going to go far ahead of the kids who don't get that. And when you have a soul in your possession, you cannot rely on a Bible class teacher to give them all of the nutrient they need. So that was just super important, and I had an incredible group of parents. They're just absolutely fantastic. These kids are super lucky. You've got to be so flexible. Kind of what I mentioned earlier with the main point with how quick you go through a lesson. They might not understand something as quick as you thought that they would. Being flexible to what they need, because the class is not about you, it's about them. Your expectations are very, very important. This has been talked about a lot before, but they will meet whatever standard you set for them. We talk about it a lot with college kids, like have a high expectation because they can meet it. The same is true of a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. They will meet whatever you think they can. They're incredible like that. They're capable of hard things. A 2-year-old is capable of sitting still in a chair for 40 minutes. They can do it. You have to expect it of them, and you have to help them. In the beginning, you have to remind them they can do it. And that was really, really cool to watch. Another thing that I had to learn, it's okay to adjust if something isn't working. Your original plan does not have to work. It's about the kids. And you haven't failed if you have to change something. It's not about you. It's not about you being right. It's about the kid learning and being excited about their creator. So just things with that. They're capable of hard things. And you're allowed to push them because they can learn and they can grow. The goal of a Bible class is for every single child to learn and to grow. And this teaching, you know this, like on an educational, secular level, also in a spiritual level, it's about helping the kids. God has entrusted us as teachers, as parents, with these souls who need direction. And it's not always going to be easy for you or them, but it's worth it. You need to push them. You've got to help them to learn and get them excited about God because it does make a difference. If a kid remembers their Bible class teacher not being very excited to teach them about God, why would they be excited to learn about it? So your role is important as a parent, as a teacher. Huge, huge, huge deal. But little kids are amazing, and that was a really cool thing that I got to see this summer. Looking forward, a lot of my research this semester is on more tactical things, more methods, and a lot on memorization techniques. I'm going to do a lot of study on mnemonic devices and how we can implement those for all age groups because there's so much research out there, and I'm excited to tap into it. But thank you very much.
You know. One of the truths about whole lot quicker and absorb a whole lot more than what we think we can.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, Jesse Trimble, you have a question, comment?
I really do love your enthusiasm. It's very encouraging, and I bet you that those kids were very, very excited to come. And I really loved that point you made. It's about fostering excitement for God, and I think that's very applicable to what you were doing every week. My question is kind of silly. I was just wondering if there was a story that they liked the most.
So they loved, they were excited about all of them. The story that they remembered and latched onto was the one with Pharaoh and Moses and the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea. That was the one, like I would give them a coloring sheet every time. Every single kid after that class flipped their coloring sheet over and drew their own picture of the story on the back and were telling me about it as they did it. They're like, look, here's the water, and they're going through. I'm like, who's that? That's Pharaoh. I'm like, oh no. And then they would draw all the water crashing, and it was the coolest thing because I didn't ask them to do that. So that was super, super, super cool, especially when characters and a piece of paper and blocks weren't accurate to the actual story they caught on, and it was the coolest thing to watch.
So these were all left-brained or right?
No, they were smart.
I really liked all your ideas and all the tactics that you used in class to help them remember the story, especially the one with all the characters and the figurines so they could actually see it. I taught a class this summer also, but it was older kids. It was like 7 and 8-year-olds, and there was also an 11-year-old girl in the class, so it was kind of like the difference that you had, but with an older instead of younger. It was kind of awkward, but when I started teaching them, they would try and flip to the page in their Bible. I'd help them find it, and then try and read along, and it just wasn't working very well because some of them couldn't read or they just would get distracted. And so eventually I was like, okay, I want you to, if you have to, close your eyes, and as I'm talking to you, see the picture in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so much easier at the end of the class to review it, and they remembered it and they knew it. So I really liked your idea of using the figures so they could actually see it. I really liked that one.
Something with that, when I was little, we would do like a family Bible reading in my living room, and we had a big whiteboard. And me and my 2 sisters, we would take turns sitting at the whiteboard. Didn't matter what the story was about. It could be a genealogy that lasted 5 chapters. And my parents would have us draw a picture while they read it. And then at the end, we had to tell them what the story was about. And anytime we did the Garden of Eden, there was a huge scribble on the board, and it stained from where Satan's head got squished. There's a lot. It sticks with you when you have to do it yourself, and that's really cool. Mm-hmm.
I just really appreciate this. Like, I grew up with like 20 members in my church, like on a very good day, and like my dad was a preacher, and me and my sisters were the only kids there. So like, I didn't grow up with Bible class. Just we did it at home afterwards. So I think it's so important for kids to have Bible class at church so that they can remember. It makes it a lot easier to recall things as you get older. So I'm like envious of those who had like Bible class, but I think it's really exciting that you're excited about this and for the next generation too. So I really appreciate it.
You'll have to teach your little kids Bible class to get that experience.
Like last semester, I think
We were talking about it. Yes.
Well, what did you find out? And anybody in here that's ever taught knows this, and you figured it out. In order to teach at any level, especially little kids, you've got to know the facts cold, and you have to know the context of the story so that you can break it down and explain it to them.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's math or science or literature or what have you. And that helps you, that pushes you. You learn so much more when you teach because you have to. They're never going to get everything you know. You don't have time, and they're probably not going to understand it. But you're going to have to reduce it to a point where you get the essentials across to them. And God made the Word and the Scripture so that can be done. You think He told us everything we can understand? I mean, there's no way. And we're told what we need to know, and then you break it down from there. So yeah, you're gonna experience that. Maybe you'll even have a stick figure to take home. Hey, my oldest grandson now, he brought home that Days of Creation. I forget which number it was. Was it 1?
You had 1, maybe I had 2.
Yeah, he was so proud of us. You know, he's 2. You know, he's like, look at this. Wonderful.
He did good. That was his first. I remember that was his first time Amanda came in. She's like, he hasn't been to Bible. The kids sat in the chair the whole time. Like, they are so capable, and it was the coolest thing ever. But
Yeah. They do rise to your expectations.
They do. It's amazing.
Sarah?
I just thought it was great how much you talked about being like adapting to everything. You know, for everything you laid out, like, okay, here's what my expectations were, and like it was different, but that was okay, and you adapted. Because it is so true that like every kid is different, and I mean, kind of what we were just talking about, like everyone kind of has their specialty sometimes with how they learn and stuff. So I just thought it was great that you were. I think that's something that every teacher needs to realize and do, is to like adapt and be able to like cater to what that kid, how that kid learns and stuff. So.
What you learn about illustrations, you have to be careful.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to be very careful because this kind of a tangent in a soapbox, but you remember the ark as like a little half circle with a little thing, and a roof like that is nothing at all like what's described in the Bible, and it's okay to draw the ark as a box on there. They know it's the ark, they know it's the boat, so you're allowed to be biblically accurate with the pictures, even to small kids, and it was cool to get to see those details and see them still connect with it even though it's different.
Well, I also loved your enthusiasm. That was great to listen to. I just liked how you brought up giving a little break too, because you know, like we sit through 50-minute classes, and I feel like our brains sometimes go other places. So of course, a 1 or 2 year old is going to be like that too, and just implementing things that can help them pay attention more. I just loved how you were like adapting to what they needed.
What'd you do for them in that break?
Well, I didn't realize it was a need until my mom came and helped me over VBS week. Learned so much that week because that's even later past these poor children's bedtime. But they had little animals up on the wall, and my mom had the idea one time. She's like, okay, we're going to tell them randomly to stand up and go pet the dog on the wall. And they would do that. So not related to the lesson at all. So in the future, when I have a chance to plan more about it, it would be related to the lesson. But things that just let them stand up and move around. Because end of the day, especially if it's on a Wednesday night or things like that, they've got to move around because they're exhausted and they need that, and that's okay.
How many of us shuddered when we thought about Wednesday night class? Teaching us. You have that with adults.
Yes.
They get antsy and they get, you know, all that. It is a different class on Wednesday night than on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Something else, Jim? No? No? Anything, Jesse? You're not gonna hammer on this left, right, brain?
No, I think you've done it.
But it is interesting what you brought out. I mean, how people learn, what we expect of them.
Yes.
It relates so well with the most important thing we can ever teach them. And you can't sell them short. And managing your time is so vital. You don't know that until you teach. So it is. All right, questions or comments from the group? Say it, Karen.
Did you say at the beginning that your goal is initially to develop a curriculum from this age group that you taught on up to what age?
I would love to go all the way up to adult classes, but probably more realistically, definitely through high school, because what I found, at least growing up in my experience, a lot of the booklets or the questions, because most teachers don't want to actually teach out of the Bible for whatever reason, are, hey, here's this question, chapter 3, verse 17 is where you find the answer. And then we wonder why kids graduate high school and don't know how to answer their own questions about the Bible. So original spark was to create a curriculum that little by little trains you to be able to study the Bible on your own and to be able to formulate an argument and a response for yourself, and then to be able to regurgitate that, because the goal is to teach and is to spread the word, and you can't do that if you don't know how to study it yourself in the first place.
Well, I'll be very interested to see that curriculum plan.
She's been in touch with curriculum developers and whatnot, so I think that'll come along as we go. Again, we don't expect it in 2 years, but maybe by next semester.
20.
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I
ran into some difficulty with parents at the level of what I was expecting kids to do when they were younger. And some of the arguments that I would make was, they can learn this. You know, your child can sing and, you know, repeat all of the lyrics and all of the lines from a Disney movie they've seen. So why can't they learn these stories and these songs and these Bible memorization, something that's way more important than, you know, what the current Disney movie is. And they really do. And music attached to remembering is amazing. The way God made our brains, what music does for us, and the memorization. Like I wrote a bunch of songs in the Old Testament for the stories that nobody writes songs about, because I was assigned to toddlers, and we were going through the Bible, and so we had to keep the whole family together. And there's a lot of huge gaps where there's no songs out there. So I wrote those, and my kids who are all grown now, you know, what are the 10 Commandments? Okay, well, let me sing the song. You know, what are the names of all the judges? Wait, let me sing the song. So it really does implant things, and it's a lot more fun to learn it when it's music.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So we've been talking about that. That was one of the things that I'm hoping to research next semester, because you talk to like most any college kid girl, and they can tell you all of Taylor Swift's lyrics verbatim. But we don't push memorizing scripture as much as we should. If we have the younger kid, a kid in 2nd grade, you're pushing them to memorize multiplication table and things like that, and that's important. Or like football plays or things like that. Like, you've got to have this memorized. But the moment you say memorize the Bible, oh, you're pushing them too hard. They can't do that. So changing that perspective around is incredibly important.
Well, thank you very much, Jordan. Well, appreciate Jordan very much, Hallie and Jesse. It's no small thing to get up in front of a group and speak, and they did a great job tonight in helping us understand things from bioremediation, which I'm going to read more about now, and teaching, and of course educating the whole person, right? And I appreciate too Ruth Connolly and Sarah Scarborough and Jenna Kirchville for being our panelists tonight. We have our 4th honors evening next Thursday night, and then a couple weeks after that we'll have our 5th and 6th, and we'll be done by the end of November. But next Thursday is our next honors evening, and if you can join us then, we'd welcome you. And if not, we certainly appreciate your presence tonight. Thank you all again very much,